Lyme disease means different things to different groups of people. This is probably the general understanding, but to some researchers it's a bit more complex. To many doctors, and to some members of the public. Now, to understand why this should be and why we have a Lyme disease controversy, let's take a look at history. Most scientific papers on Lyme disease start with an introduction to the disease and often say it was discovered after a cluster of cases of arthritis in the United States of America. It wasn't quite like that. Over in Europe, in the late 19th century, a skin rash had been described, and at the beginning of the 20th century, Afzelius in Sweden had noticed the rash after a tick bite. Nerve pain had been reported, and a Swedish dermatologist had linked meningitis and encephalitis with erythema migrans. So we have the first description of neurological Lyme disease, but it wasn't actually called that at that point. In the mid-20th century, newly discovered penicillin was tried on all sorts of conditions. A Swedish dermatologist, speaking at a small conference in the United States, proposed spirochete involvement, and shortly afterwards the infectious nature of the disease was proved by a doctor who transferred a biopsy of a rash to his own arm and developed the disease. So 40 years ago, the course of the disease was well known, and these two rashes were recognized. Over in the United States, Rudolf Scramenti, who'd recorded an erythema migrans on a fellow physician, actually treated the rash with penicillin, and having been present at this small conference when the Swedish dermatologist had spoken about spirochetes, he actually mentioned, "Is this a spirochete?" Mothers in Old Lyme in Connecticut noted cases of rheumatoid arthritis, and with an epidemiologist recognized that an autoimmune disease should not be clustered geographically. Alan Steer then described this as Lyme arthritis, and 4 years later, a Swiss-American who had cut his PhD eye teeth on spirochetes isolated Borrelia burgdorferi. So everything is going really well, and now the research starts in earnest. By the mid-1980s, we knew quite a bit. We understand the expression of antigens for use in testing, and it had been discovered that bacteria could survive courses of antibiotics. In the UK, case studies are being documented. Recurrences are noted, so we know that the disease can lie latent. Awareness was growing that Lyme disease could affect many systems, including the heart. Research continues. The reasons for the persistence of the bacterium are postulated. The knowledge of different genus species and strains of Borrelia deepens. Serology, the detection of antibodies, has advanced, but it is realized that some cases test negative. We have laid foundations for understanding this complex organism and the course of the multifaceted disease. Move forward to now, 16 years on, when you would have expected further progress. This is from a letter sent to a GP by a UK laboratory. Hang on, I thought we just showed that in the 1990s they had shown seronegative patients, Borrelia isolated from the spinal fluid and other tissues? Back in the 1980s, relapsing Lyme disease was found. Ah, that's all right then. How can this happen? Let's go back to history to see what's been happening in the UK. In the last part of 20th century, there were a lot of things to distract the medical eye from Lyme disease. A shortage of infectious diseases specialists with lots of new diseases to deal with, lots of outbreaks to deal with, lots of exciting things that were threatening the UK. Separate incidents were all dealt with by separate organisations, and this led to a reorganisation of the Health Protection Agency. As a result of reorganisation, the specialist laboratory moves to Southampton, and recorded cases are small, apparently less than 400 cases a year in the UK. Colonial experience actually gives a focus on overseas development, which means that many infectious diseases consultants are far more interested in tropical diseases, and there is a lot of competition there. A whole raft of interesting life-threatening diseases, and the demise of the generalist, who is needed in Lyme disease, which affects many systems. You can see why Lyme disease becomes marginal. Through into this century, in the United States, there's increasing patient activism. Back in the UK, all expertise is vested in the HPA laboratory. The internet allows a lot more exchange of information. Patients can get hold of scientific journals without having to go to university library, and they have the time for reading. Doctors do not. Underlying this, everybody knows that the media sometimes misunderstands and misreports, and the public gets things wrong. Patients do want a cure, a diagnosis of something that has the chance of a successful treatment. However, science, despite all our advances, does not yet have all the answers. In this climate, we have a marginalised disease with all expertise vested in one person in one laboratory in the UK. Several things then happen. In 2003, a concerned patient's mother reports a case where the child was having what seemed to her prolonged antibiotic treatment. A few doctors referred some other cases to the Health Protection Agency, and in 2004, the HPA wrote to the Chief Medical Officer about the particular GP involved with these cases. And we then start a high-level investigation into inappropriate diagnosis and treatment. Over across the Atlantic, the ILADS versus IDSA controversy is getting underway and now spreads over to Europe. Meanwhile, legitimate questions in the UK about guidance are ignored. LDA tries to get mainstream clinicians to come to talk at LDA conferences, and they will not. They are afraid to stand up. At one point, LDA is presenting together with Health Protection Agency staff who are banned from sharing a platform with this organisation. The Department of Health refuses to speak with LDA. There's no reconciling of any differences. This is not just the UK. There is polarisation across the whole of Europe. Why is Lyme disease any different? Other charities work closely with doctors. They have joint research programs. This is why. There was a concerted manipulation. A USA Freedom of Information request revealed a close relationship between federal officials and a particular group of researchers. A release of emails revealed a United States war, essentially trying to prove that chronic Lyme did not exist. We know there's a problem with the USA politics, and in the UK we tried to keep out of this. However, it transpired that this group comprised doctors from America and Europe, including the single source of expertise in the UK, the head of the UK Lyme testing unit. This ad hoc international group was asked to provide material to counter the increasing evidence that Lyme disease could survive a short course of antibiotics. They discussed the fact that they would not win the war on science alone, and so would have to mount a socio-political offensive. The head of the UK Lyme testing unit contributed to this. This group are so inwardly focused that keep the faith is thought to be a suitable valediction from a health professional. They have a campaign to try to show that there is no active disease following a short course of antibiotics. This paper is not an appraisal of chronic Lyme. A true appraisal looks at the evidence for and the evidence against. You cannot critically appraise something that you put in inverted commas. The anti-patients campaign then got underway to get papers published in scientific literature. There is, of course, an element of truth in this. Patients with medically unexplained symptoms do sometimes think that Lyme disease might explain their condition. Some have been proved right, but some are simply hopeful. The campaign continues. This article puts Lyme disease in the same bracket as AIDS and the MMR vaccine and autism, i.e. patients in the wrong. Doctors, knowing how the public has believed that the MMR vaccine causes autism, but knowing nothing about Lyme disease, they'll believe this. Why not? A high-impact, well-regarded journal, and it's written by doctors, including the Lyme disease expert from the UK. No one knows at this stage that this ad hoc international group was formed specifically for the purpose of propagating this view and only this view. It was not formed to review the evidence, but to put one view and achieve one end. So who is responsible for this mess that we find ourselves in with Lyme disease? Well, that ad hoc group for a start, but everyone else must acknowledge their part. The problem is in the psychology. People inevitably believe their peers. Health Protection Agency believe their own officials. Doctors will believe fellow doctors. The Department of Health will believe the professionals that it puts in place. And the public will believe the public. There is misinformation on the internet, in newspapers and coffee shops and gossips. But the consequence of all of this is a lack of trust. Doctors don't trust patients and patient charities because of what they have been told. Patients now don't trust the NHS because they know that in some areas they are mistaken about Lyme disease. That lack of trust is still being reinforced. Earlier this year, a seminar was held to celebrate the 10 years of the Health Protection Agency prior to being merged into Public Health England. Amongst all the real achievements in this seminar was a comment in the section about major incidents. A huge industry in convincing people they have chronic Lyme disease. There has been no such campaign. This charity is not accredited to the Department of Health's information standard for propagating misinformation. The huge industry is elsewhere, in the efforts of the ad hoc International Lyme Disease Group and their anti-patients campaign. But Mr. McCracken doesn't know this. He believes his single expert. They got one doctor suspended. Cases were brought against several others, but dismissed by the GMC. The flip side of this is that droves of doctors are now unwilling to put their heads above the parapet and treat a relapsing patient with the antibiotics that might be needed. The response of the chair: this statement is likely to have been believed by everyone at that seminar. How could the Chief Executive of the Health Protection Agency get it wrong? Surely he must be right to have believed the head of the laboratory. Surely the rubbish information couldn't be on the Health Protection Agency website, as the patients say. Could it? Well, now things are changing. Patients have to move things forward for their own safety. So this charity has documented uncertainties in diagnosis and treatment. The National Institute of Health Research is now investigating these verified uncertainties. Testing for Lyme disease has moved to the Public Health England lab at Porton, and they are investigating other tests. It seems the current tests were not perhaps as definitive as previously claimed, else why are they looking for better? The Department of Health and HPA Porton are listening to us. It's early days to say how this will work. Are they really hearing what we say? A national referral clinic opens shortly. We hope it will deal with difficult cases, not just those that GPs can deal with nice, easy, positive blood tests. Public Health England are planning an open seminar so that they can hear what doctors and patients have as their principal concerns. We have verified that there are uncertainties in diagnosis and treatment. There are no good quality systematic reviews for these questions. We do not know the best treatment other than very early Lyme disease. We do not know the key questions to help a clinical diagnosis. We do not know how effective the current tests are. But these are just the top 10 uncertainties in diagnosis and treatment. The biggest uncertainty is, can we rebuild the trust between doctors and patients? Doctors have been told for so many years that patients read misinformation on the internet, that the tests detect more than 99% of late disease, that more than 28 days of antibiotics is no better than placebo. Patients are told time and time again, it's all in your head, and antibiotics must have killed everything. Are we able to step aside from our confirmation bias and look together at the evidence? Time will tell.